Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Capital Analyst. Today our guest is Mr. Vineet Iyer. Vineet's bio reads as follows: a teacher, an advisor, and a coach. As an advisor, he is the co-founder of Wealth Creators Financial Advisors, a SEBI-registered investment advisory firm that also manages its own small case fund. As a teacher, he has simplified complicated concepts of finance to many students and runs his own finance education academy, Finaudible. And as a coach, he has shared his financial planning insights with umpteen number of individuals and helped them take better financial decisions. Welcome to the show, Vineet, and we are truly elated to have you with us tonight.
Thanks, Prabal, for having me here tonight. I'm looking forward to having an exciting session.
Sure. So let's begin by going to a little bit of flashback. So it's the year 2001, and you have just started your BA in political science. And cut back 20 years later to 2021, and you are managing a financial advisory firm, running your own finance education academy, and giving people financial advice. So walk us through this journey and how this transformation came about.
Okay, so basically, I started my graduation in the year 2003, and it was the same year when I started working at the age of 18. Due to some financial constraints in the family, I had to start working at an early age. And the reason I chose arts was because I was a UPSC aspirant actually. So until the second year of my college, I was preparing for it along with my full-time job. But since I started working at the age of 18, I started working for a bank, not in the roles directly, but I was working for the bank on an off-role position. So I started liking the entire finance world, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for me to continue studies and also work. So I gave up my dream of the UPSC exams in the second year. But since I was already in the middle of that graduation in the arts field, I did not have an opportunity to go back and again start with commerce. So after I completed my graduation in the year 2006, I thought of doing some higher education course. So one of the first things that comes to anyone's mind when it comes to PG is doing an MBA. So I was also one of them thinking about doing an MBA. But then I thought that doing an MBA from any other institute is not going to help. So I need to be doing it from a premier institute. And if that's not happening, then let me take some break. Let me make some good money. And then probably I'll take a break later and do a full-time course. And for a couple of years, I was just working and not doing anything, no studies, nothing. In 2008, I came across this program called a CFP, Certified Financial Planner. And incidentally, in 2006, I also started selling insurance. I happened to meet someone who helped me know about the insurance world. So I thought, let me start something so that I can also have an additional source of income. And slowly and steadily, I started pitching insurance. In 2008, when I got introduced to mutual funds, and then I did my certification in mutual fund distribution. Then I also started studying CFP program. And as when I was progressing in my studies, I realized that there is more to finance than what we really do. So up till that time, I think finance was more of product selling and basically getting business. But when I started doing this program, I realized that you need to first understand what the other person needs and then define his requirements and try to fit in the product or try to suit the product meeting his requirements rather than the other way around. So 2008, I started that. 2009, I completed, and I started my advisory journey by doing free financial planning for people around me. So I approached my friends, I approached my known ones, and I told them that this is what I can do for you, which will give you a good insight of where you are, where you want to go, what is the gap. And I started doing this on a ad hoc base. Like I was not charging anything because I was also gathering experience. I also did not know the right process. And slowly and steadily, when I started getting positive responses, I built up on my practice and I started charging some money so that people can take it seriously. And this I'm talking about in the year 2010. I started charging, and my first plan, what I charged was 500 rupees. Okay. And I was talking about a period wherein it was more of product distribution, earning commissions, and giving free advice. And there I was charging money for creating a plan and telling the person that, where are you? So that gave me a lot of confidence. And then slowly and steadily, I started working with other people. I started increasing my compensation, I mean, the fees that I was charging. So from 2010 till 2015, I was parallelly doing this. And 2011, I also got an opportunity to teach financial planning at one of the Friends Institute. So he had a visiting faculty who had to take some break in between for about 3 months and due to some personal reasons. So he was looking for a backfill, and he approached me since I was a CFP certificant. So he told me that why don't you fill in the gap, and then it will help you to learn something new. I was a little reluctant because these classes used to happen on the weekends, and you know how when you're young, Monday to Friday you work, and Saturday Sunday you want some time for yourself. And I was already occupied with my advisory work, and then these classes, which used to happen early in the morning, and I was never an early morning guy. But after giving it a thought, I thought that if it's just a matter of 3 months, why don't I go and accept this assignment? So I started teaching as well. I was doing financial practice as well, financial advisory as well, and I did that for about 4 years full time. 2015 is when I thought that I should quit. In fact, I quit a year before than what I had anticipated, because 2014 is when I started doing CFA. I cleared CFA level 1 in my first attempt. Level 2 I gave in 2015. Unfortunately, because of overconfidence and lack of preparation, I flunked. So I thought I'll clear in 2015 level 2, 2016 level 3, and then I quit, and then I start my advisory. But when this thing happened in 2015, when I couldn't clear my level 2, I thought that I cannot wait for 2 more years, right? So the day I got my result, I think the very next day I resigned and I served that notice period. And 1st of September 2015, when I officially started my advisory business. And I did not start alone. Actually, I had met someone during my CFA days, and his name is Manoj, and he also had the same objective. He had also quit his full-time job. He was also quite passionate about this. And we came together, we decided to come together and work and build this organization. And that's how Wealth Creators came into existence. And since 2015, it's been 6 years that I'm into this. And it's been a roller coaster ride. The first 2 to 3 years, I had my own set of doubts that what I'm doing is this right, because when you're having a full-time job, you're getting a fixed pay, you get kind of used to it, and then you're getting into this field wherein people are not accustomed to paying, and you're charging them fees for the advice, which they're not sure in the first place whether it's going to add some value. So initially 2-3 years was difficult, and the past 2 to 3 years has been extremely good, because whatever hard work that we did in the initial 2-3 years, that started paying off. And we are proud to say that today more than 80% of the clients that we get is from the existing clients. So we don't do any active marketing. So we let our clients do the work for us as our marketing department, you can say, and they refer us people, and that's how we grow. So that's been my journey, Prabal, over the last 18 years now.
That's pretty great, Vinny. So now that you have mentioned it, I want to understand what are the kind of roadblocks you faced when you started approaching people. Like, why don't people want to take financial planning formally, or what are the kind of roadblocks people have in their minds, which is why they are reluctant to approach a financial advisor in the first place? Sure.
So first of all, many people do not know what financial planning actually is all about. Okay. They don't know what purpose it will serve. What people generally think financial planning is, making some investments and then buying a pension plan, buying a children's education plan, putting some money in mutual funds, putting some money in provident fund, and that's it. So there is a lack of awareness in people. It was back then about 10 years ago when I started this. Even today also, I feel that there is unawareness in majority of the people, but slowly and steadily, because of the media advent and so many other things that have been happening through channels like YouTube and other stuff. So people have started realizing that they need someone who can help them create a plan and execute the plan. So that was a challenge that I faced. Second was that people thought that advice comes free, because no one used to charge, right? And people used to come, they used to sell products, like an insurance guy will come, sell an insurance policy, will make commissions. And the other person was also not keen, the client was not keen to understand how much is the commission that the other person is making. In some occasions, you also heard stories about kickbacks happening. wherein an insurance agent comes, sells a policy, and also shares a portion of the premium. So that was a prevalent thing then. And then you have a guy who comes and talks to you about creating a plan and charging fees. So people had that hesitation or that reluctance. Second was that at that point of time, many of these people who needed financial planning, they were not doing investments. First of all, I mean, if you see in the 5-6 years only, a lot of people started exposing themselves to marketing investments. But about 10-12 years ago, you would find a handful of people who were doing marketing investment. So there was a need, but people were not aware. So that was the challenge that I faced. And it took me a lot of time to, convince people, make them understand, help them see the future, which is coming, but people don't visualize that. And so that was the thing. And slowly and steadily, I understood what are the pain points of people, and then I started talking to them about that and help them realize that why this is something which is important and why you should be taking a service of a unbiased fee-only advisor. Okay, so that's what challenges that I faced.
Sure. So let's jump straight into financial planning then. So as you have already mentioned, so what exactly is a financial plan and how can someone define it? Because if you talk to people who have just started their career or are pursuing their MBA or doing some qualifications, they say that their financial goal is just to make more money. So
Sure.
How does financial plan link with this, and how can one define it for himself or herself?
Sure. So anything good that you want to do in life, if you don't have a predefined plan, things generally doesn't go well. Whether it comes to studies, whether it comes to your career, whether it comes to doing some big things like buying a house or getting married, you need to have a plan in place. Okay, very rarely you will see people, wherein things are happening to them naturally. So likewise, in your financial life also, you need to chart out a plan which will give you a direction on which you need to actually start walking. Okay, when you said that most of the people are running behind money, making more money, or just running behind returns, it's like you are going to a destination and you're trying to find out which is the quickest way for you to reach that destination. But what if the destination is not connected by the quickest way? Or the destination that is connected by the quickest way, that is not what your destination is. It is something else, right? So when you create a plan, it will actually tell you what things will take you there. For example, if I want to plan for my retirement, does having a pension plan is going to help me to have an effective retirement? The answer is no, because you don't know whether that money that you're going to get from the pension plan is going to be adequate. Second, you're planning to retire at the age of 60. You don't know whether you will be physically able to work till the age of 60. You don't know the investments that you're making today, are these efficient enough in terms of return or risk that you're taking, which will help you get there. So there are several factors that are there, which when you create a financial plan, those gray spots or those blind spots, are taken care. And then you can start achieving those things. And the financial plan will periodically also tell you, where are you against the stated goals? Are you lagging behind? Are you ahead? If you're lagging behind, what are the changes that you need to do? If you're ahead, then can you also focus on other areas of your life if you're ahead of that financial goal? That's where financial plan plays a very important role.
Sure. So when it comes to financial planning, it mainly focuses around how much you save, how much you invest in insurance, how much you invest in investments, bank loans, all these kind of things. So give us an overview of what are the main investment instruments or investment opportunities available in India that people who are just starting their financial planning journey can explore.
Absolutely. So first of all, Prabal, a lot of people think that insurance is an instrument for investments. I completely disagree with this. The way I look at insurance is it's a risk protection tool. Okay. There was a reason why this risk protection tool was converted into an investment instrument back in the early 70s and 80s, because that point of time, people were reluctant to put their money into something which is not going to give them anything in return. Okay. And that's where LIC, which was the only insurance company then, they tried to push insurance by having the investment angle to it. Okay. And because it started selling, people thought that insurance is an investment because that is how it was portrayed. But that's not how it is, because when you try to combine both of these things, you're not getting adequate insurance. At the same time, your returns that you're getting from the instrument, the insurance policy, is not adequate. Okay. Whatever insurance policies that I've analyzed over the past few years, I've seldomly seen any policy giving more than 5 to 5.5% as an annualized return. That is first. Second, I'm reading this beautiful book by Morgan Housel, Psychology of Money, where he categorically mentions that saving is more important than investing. People think that investing is what makes them money, but actually, if you focus on saving, it really does not matter in the longer term what instrument have you used for investing. Okay, if it is a proper investment instrument. So in our financial advisory practice, what we focus more on is helping people increase their savings potentiality. And that's where people really need help. They need to know how much they should be spending versus what they are spending. They need to know how much they should be saving. So once you give them a target and periodically review it, that is where people get into that habit. So once that saving is done, then it's time for you to channelize. And the different kinds of instruments that are available in India. In fact, about a decade ago, there were very limited instruments which were available to retail investors. But today, because of a lot of technological platforms, a lot of fintech coming up, it's become very easy for anyone to start investing with as little as 100 rupees a month. Okay. So some of the popular investments have been mutual funds. Then people can invest in stocks. So opening a Demat account was very, very difficult about 5-6 years ago. With Zerodha coming into the picture, it just takes about 30 minutes for you to open a Demat account online. Okay. So it's become very, very easy. So for anyone who has just started working and wants to save and invest that money, I think the stepping stone for them should be investing into a good quality, large cap mutual fund. Okay. It can be of any company. And once they get a feel of it, then venture out into other things like ETFs, stocks. Maybe they can invest in gold. They can invest in fixed income instruments. So they need to first define what are the financial goals. Now, typically, when you ask a young individual what are his financial goals, retirement is not on their mind, right? Marriage, probably yes, probably no. Okay. So when you talk to a young individual about saving, investing for retirement, it's going to be a big roadblock for that individual. So what could be the goals? What entices a young earner is having an emergency fund, having a fund for travel, having a fund for buying gadgets, having a fund for buying a vehicle, and so on and so forth. So if a new earner starts, putting down his or her goals and then start saving and choose appropriate investment instruments, and when he or she starts seeing that those goals are getting fulfilled, the kind of joy that these earners will feel, that will set them up for the longer innings of their financial life. Okay, so that is what I recommend. And there are more than 14-15 instruments in India. Okay, but for a young earner, there are very limited instruments. And anyone who is a very established investor and who understand markets, there are some products like AIFs, PMS. You've got structured products. These are some exotic investment instruments which needs a good amount of money to begin with, and you need to understand what is the risk. So that is for the seasoned investor. Okay, but for young earners, I think mutual funds, some good quality stocks, bonds, liquid fund, they are good to start with.
Sure. I think that's a very important insight that you gave about focusing more on savings rather than just investing, because a lot of youngsters these days, they're just chasing returns, that the security
Absolutely.
that offers them the maximum return, and they're not really focused on how much money they are investing, which is a function of basically their savings. So
Right.
That's a very important insight. Just to follow up on the question that you raised, that a lot of youngsters don't have very long-term financial planning goals in their mind. They are maybe saving to buy a vehicle or a gadget, or maybe a foreign vacation or something like that. So how does financial planning for short-term goals like these differ from financial planning for long-term goals like retirement or saving for your children's education or things like that?
Absolutely. So, what is the core difference? The core difference is the instrument that you will choose for achieving your shorter term goals versus longer term goals. So, if you want to go for a vacation in the next 1 year, so it is not suggested that you go for risky instruments like equity mutual funds or stocks, because those are volatile over a shorter period of time. At the same time, when you're planning for a longer term goal like retirement, investing money in a public provident fund or investing money into a post office schemes or a fixed deposit is not going to get you there or comfortably get you there. You'll need a lot of large outflow if you want to achieve that retirement kind of a goal with these instruments. So it's important that once you have defined these goals, you choose the right instrument, okay, which will help you to get as close as possible to the financial goal with the least possible risk. So for shorter term, it should be fixed income instruments with not too much of volatility. And for longer terms, you can invest into marketing instruments, which has the potential to give you higher returns, but which comes with a lot of volatility, which you can digest if you have a longer investment horizon. So that is what I would recommend.
Sure. And you also mentioned gold as an investment opportunity. Personally, I have seen all the elders in my family invest all their surplus money in gold and put it in a locker. And these days we have more opportunities of buying gold, like gold ETFs, gold bonds. Digital gold has come up recently as well. So I feel that Indians are somewhere obsessed with gold. So is this obsession justified? And as a young professional, how should I look at investing in gold?
Sure. So first of all, I think there is a mindset shift nowadays, which I see of younger people who look at gold as an investment opportunity first. They don't look at gold from a consumption perspective. Okay, so our previous generation, our parents used to look at gold from consumption and safety purposes, right? Why they used to invest? Because if tomorrow, if there is any kind of unfortunate event, you can rely on that goal and you can cash out, right? You did not have 24/7 active banks. You did not have ATMs, but you always had money lenders who can pawn your gold and they can lend you. So that was the initial thought process. Second, the female members of the family were quite fascinated by the gold jewelry. So that was a more consumption related purchases that was there. But today, I see that at least in the millennials, people are not keen, or the ladies are not keen in buying gold for consumption. So that is a shift that I'm seeing. Plus, even in events like marriages, you will see that a lot of artificial jewelry that is used rather than actual gold. So the kind of expenses that happens in that area is also coming down. Okay. But having said that, is gold a good asset class to have? I think yes, but it's not a prominent asset class to have, because if you look at the last 30 years of return of gold with all its higher returns, it's barely about 8 to 8.5%. And if I compare this with the long-term inflation, it has just given about 2 to 3% more than the inflation rate. Okay. And if I talk about the last 7 to 8 years of gold return, barring what happened in the last 1 year, it's almost flattish. Okay. And if you look at the tendency of the gold returns, it will start working when there is a lot of uncertainty around. So if you would have observed that from June 2020, when we were having some tussle with China, we were having that border issue. There was a lot of uncertainty around. There was COVID there, and you started seeing. In fact, 2019 is when it started. You started seeing gold moving up, and then COVID happened, lockdown happened. A lot of uncertainty. People did not know what would happen, and suddenly you saw a jump in the gold prices. It was about a 40-45% jump in a matter of few months. But as in when we started coming out of COVID from the month of August, you saw from a higher level of, I think, 57 or 58,000 rupees per 10 grams. Over the next few months, it dropped to about 40 to 43,000. So there was a 40%, more than a 40% jump, drop that happened. And no one was talking about it. But if you see such a massive drop in the markets, everyone starts talking about it, even if they have not invested their own money. So there is a psychological thing that happens. So people, they think that if they've invested in gold, even if it has fallen down, it will at some point of time go up. So they are not really bothered. At the same time, when people invest in real estate, even if the value falls after they've invested, they still think that at some point of time it will go up. So they are not very much worried because they have that real estate, they have that gold. But when the same thing happens with equities, people are bothered. Even if that is not where you have majority of your life savings, still then people are bothered. So there has to be a psychological or a mental shift of how you need to look at physical assets like gold, real estate versus some marketing assets like mutual funds or stocks, things like that. So when you steadily keep on seeing this, I think gold will be more like a hedge product rather than a core investment instrument.
Sure. And in the financial plan of a lot of young professionals, buying a house is one major thing that comes up frequently. So
yeah,
when we approach buying a house, should we look at it as a real estate investment, or is it a necessity or even a liability? So
okay, the way I look at it, and I have a different perspective on this, and I keep on talking about this with my set of clients, is that first of all, you should not be buying house at a very early age. The reason for that is, when you're young, you've just started your career, and because now it's a global career, you're not restricted to one city. In fact, you're not even restricted to one country nowadays. You can get opportunities anywhere. So does that mean that you keep on buying houses in every city that you move or every country that you move? The answer is no. So if you buy a house, you get into a large liability at the beginning of your life. So that impacts the savings propensity of an individual to a very large extent. Okay. First, the person is not able to enjoy his initial life, his earnings in the initial years, which I believe that he or she should be doing. A certain portion of the money should be used for some pleasures in life, some explorations in life, and some good portion also should be saved aside. Okay. If you look at 30 years ago, by the time a person used to buy a house, or at least think about buying a house, he used to cross about 45, 50. The reason was because people did not have access to easy loans. People used to dip into their provident funds. A major chunk of the home purchase used to be funded through provident fund, and the balance used to be funded through the bank, because banks were also not comfortable lending a very large amount. And today, in some cases, you get up to 90-95% of the house price in the form of loans. So people want you to borrow, because if you borrow, they have their cash flows coming in for the next 15-20 years. Okay. And you are blocked for a longer period. And people think that they will take loan and they will clear it off in the next 5 years. But what they're also forgetting is that they are losing on that 5 years of compounding period, which is going to be very, very critical, over a 20-30 year of your investing life. So what I suggest is, and I've been seeing that trend also, is to not buy a house at a very early age. And even if you're buying, buy something that is well within your budget and not stretch yourself. Okay. So maybe you have a capacity to buy a 2 BHK or 50 lakhs. Don't go for that. Maybe, restrict yourself to a 1 BHK. If you want that emotional security, because some people want that emotional security. So tomorrow, if something happens, at least they can go and, stay in that house. So even if they're reluctant or they're keen on buying it, I think they should buy well within their budget. Second, what I believe is, there are so many things that are now coming up. I'm sure you would have heard about a concept called as community living, which OYO has come up with, right? So what is the threat that people who stay on rent have? The threat is that after every 11 months, the landlord is going to come and he's going to either increase your rent massively, or he's going to ask you to vacate your house. That is what the belief is. And that's where, because of that security, emotional security or uncertainty, people want to buy their own house. But that's slowly changing. Today, if you see, I'm staying on rent. Okay. Today, if I see, if your payments are on time, if you're a no nuisance guy, right? And if you're taking good care of the house owner is not bothered whether you're staying for 1 year or 5 years. Okay. The house owner will not come and check. I've been staying on rent for quite a long year. And that emotional insecurity is not there. Plus, community living like OYO is making it very simple, wherein you just have to pay 1 month's worth of rent and you can shift in and you can stay as long as you want and you get all the facilities. So with these kind of things coming, with the Ola Uber culture coming in, the housing things is also going to get changed. So which means that slowly and steadily, the demand in the real estate from a consumption perspective, from the retail level, is slowly going to get dropped. And if that happens, then I think real estate as an investment, at least a residential real estate as an investment, may not yield the same kind of returns that probably it has yielded in the past. So that is what my observation and my study is.
Sure. And since we are on the subject of loans, education loan is something that has become pretty common these days, especially for students who want to go for higher education. Education loan is something that they usually end up taking. So if you're just starting your career and you have some kind of education loan with you, how should you look at it in your financial plan? Should you try to pay it off as soon as possible? How should you change your investment strategy to incorporate that loan in the early years of your life?
Sure. So first of all, people who already have an education loan, before they start working, so they should not be actually hurrying up on the repayments, because one good thing about an education loan is that the interest that you pay gives you a tax break. Okay, that is first thing. And if you look at the typical interest rate that you pay on an education loan is anywhere between 8-9% to about 11 to 12% if you go with a private organization. So assuming that you start with a good pay package and you're in the 30% tax bracket, so on the 10-11% of interest, even if you pay that 10-11% of interest, you are saving 30% of the tax. So your effective cost of borrowing comes to below 8%. Okay. And if you're investing for a longer period of time, you need to identify opportunities wherein you can make more than that 8% in terms of the return. And if you can find out those opportunities, and if you have that patience to stick with that investment opportunity for the longer period, there will come a time wherein the contribution that you're making, instead of using that money to prepay, will come to a level wherein your education loan and the money that you accumulated will be at par. So that's a much better way of paying your loan faster, wherein you're maintaining the liquidity and also you're getting the tax break. And then at a certain later point in time, you decide whether you've got enough liquidity and can you use a certain portion of the liquidity to pay off loan. Otherwise, it could so happen that in the pursuit of paying loans, you do not have anything to fall back on, and you never know what turn will life take at any point of time. So it's important that, things like education loan, home loans, you do not hurry up in paying. You let that continue and you find opportunities where you can positively leverage this.
Sure.
Okay? So that is what my recommendation is.
And so another aspect when it comes to financial planning is managing your expenses, which is directly linked to savings, as you mentioned earlier. So with credit cards offering cheap credit, schemes like buy now, pay later coming, which makes even expensive purchases very affordable right at the very beginning. How should people look at managing their expenses? And is this something they need to worry about right at the very beginning?
Absolutely. So interestingly, I started my career in 2003 by selling credit cards.
Okay.
So the initial 3 to 4 years of my life, I was selling credit cards. And I was so passionate about credit card selling. And I was so passionate of having credit cards on my name. You wouldn't believe that at a certain point of time, I think in 2005, I had 12 credit cards on my name.
Okay. That's quite a lot.
Also, that's a lot. I mean, so it was, since you're selling something, you would want to own it, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, if you're a salesperson in a Mercedes showroom, you would want to own that at some point of time. So I had a similar craze. But was I using it at that point of time, all this 12 credit card? The answer is no. But was I impacted because of the use of credit card? The answer is yes. Although I got my first credit card, I think in 2004. So it's been about 17 years I've been using. Barring 1 or 2 incidences, I've never rolled over my credit. But has that impacted my savings potentiality? The answer is absolutely yes. Okay. Because when you're spending, psychologically, at the back of your mind will always tell you that you spend now, you've got 45 days to make that payment, and something good will happen in that 45 days. You'll get money somewhere. Correct? So with that notion, you keep on spending, and then you get a bill, and then you struggle of how do I manage to make that bill payment? And I've seen those tough days as well. Okay. What I instead recommend, and I've been doing this practice in the last 4 years, every April, me and my wife sit together, we jot down the expenses that we make on different heads, right? From the amount of money that we spend on home, groceries, utilities, transportation, everything, insurance premiums, maintenance, and so on and so forth. We put down the approximate money that we are spending on each of these categories. And one additional thing that we do is we map the account from which we will be making those spends. Now, initially, when people used to get their incomes in cash, they used to create envelopes. So one envelope was for home expenses, one envelope was for some frivolous spending, one envelope was for saving and all those things. Can we create those kind of things today? The answer is no. I mean, since most of the things happens online, but can we have a hack of replicating the same thing? The answer is yes. How do you do that? You have separate bank accounts for separate purposes. So what we have done is I've got 4 bank accounts. In one bank account goes my some EMI. Then my investments goes from that account. One account is only related towards home expenses, wherein both me and my wife have a debit card, and whatever is related to home, we only make the spend from that card. And then we have our own personal accounts, wherein anything that we want to spend on ourselves for anything that we should not be accountable to either ourselves or to our spouses, those things will be in our separate accounts. So things like, food order, buying something online. So those things we keep a certain budget. And then on the first of the month, I simply take about 15 minutes to push the required amount in those 4 accounts. And for the remaining of the month, I am not worried at all, because psychology, what happens is, suppose I have a 30,000 rupees of monthly expenses towards my home. Once I put the 30,000 rupees, and whenever I'm using my debit card or whenever I'm making a payment through internet banking, I see that balance is coming down. And typically by the 25th, I know how much money is left and how much money I need to manage. Okay, how much expense I need to manage with the available money. So invariably, you're getting your expenses in control. Okay, and you must have heard this famous term like pay yourself first. Right. So what that really means is that whatever is the investment required, you keep that aside, and whatever is remaining, you spend that. So I do that thing. And in the spending also, I've categorized that into the different accounts. And this is what I recommend to my clients. And I've seen a lot of people seeing good benefits of it, and they have reduced on their frivolous spending. They are doing it, but it's a cautious way of spending. But something that people, a lot of times you ask a person that how much do you save, and they will have an X amount, and they will have no idea why they have only X amount saved and why not more. It's because they don't track. And when people talk about tracking, they feel that you have to write down every rupee that you spend. Maybe you can do that for a month, for a week, but after a few months, you yourself will get bored. So this is a good way of tracking your expenses by identifying accounts and just put the money on the first and just be worry-free for the remaining part of the month.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying that instead of maintaining a record of every transaction you do, it is important that you budget your amount that you want to spend on each head and try to stick to that limit. And that is something.
And when I say budget, it is not cutting down.
Yeah.
When I say budget, it's not cutting down. Maybe you can have 10-20% more. But it's basically, once you define, you try to stick to that.
Sure.
That's what I try and recommend.
Sure. And now we have some questions that I pulled in from people in my network who had some financial planning related questions. So one question is that famous rule of thumb is to invest 100 minus your age number as the proportion of your investments into equity linked instruments.
Yeah.
So first of all, is that a good thing to do or not? And second of all, how can we get over our inhibitions of investing in equity, given that it's a volatile market and every day we're seeing it going up, going down? So how can we come over that inhibition of investing in slightly more riskier products?
Sure. So I'll answer your first question. When it comes to going by the thumb rule, 100 minus your age should be the equity investment. It doesn't really work in real life. Okay, I'll tell you why it doesn't work. Because when you talk about risk, now if you look at the simple definition of risk, it's basically whatever you're thinking as an outcome, there's a digression. Okay, so if you're traveling from point A or point B, the probability of you not reaching point B and reaching point C, that is what risk is. In investments also, you're thinking that this investment instrument will give me certain returns. If that happens, that is not a risk. But if that doesn't happen, that is a risk. And in this context, even an FD is an investment, is a risk. Okay, the money that people put in FD is also a risk. The reason why it is a risk is because if you're planning for something like a long-term goal, can you invest your money in an FD and reach there? Probably yes, but the quantum of money that will be required is very, very high. That's first. Second is, will FD give you always inflation adjusted return? The answer is no. Most of the times you will see that FDs give you returns post taxes, which is lesser than the inflation rate. Is that a risk? The answer is absolutely yes. Okay. So what you need to look at is, one is the ability to take risk, and the second one is the willingness to take risk. Okay. I'll take 2 minutes to give you a very small example. Let's say there is a 25-year-old person. Okay. And for some reason, he is unemployable. He's got 50 lakh rupees as his corpus, right? And he only has that amount of money to survive for the next, say, 10 years. He doesn't see himself working for the next 10 years. And then on the other hand, there is a 70-year-old gentleman, right, who has got 50 lakh rupees with him, right? And he's annually spending about 5 lakh rupees. So this 70-year-old gentleman is spending 5 lakhs per year. And this gentleman is also spending about 5 lakh rupees per year. Okay. Now, both of them are expecting to live for the next till the age of 75. So the gentleman, his expectancy is 75, and this person wants his money to last for at least 10 years. Now, between these two individuals, to whom will you recommend a 50% allocation to equity?
To the younger
Most of the people think, the younger person, he has got age by his side, so he should be taking more risk, he should be investing into equities. The answer is no. He should not be recommended a higher portion in equity, because he may have the willingness to take risk because he wants to multiply his money. But does he have the ability? The answer is no, because he wants that money to last for the next 10 years. If he's going to withdraw about 5 lakh rupees every year, so he'll need 50 lakh rupees for the next 10 years. So does he have the ability to take risk? The answer is no. Does he have the willingness? Yes. Okay. So what should you score more? Ability or willingness? Ability. Okay. And then comes the willingness. Now, if you go to the other person's story, the old gentleman who's 70 years old, he's expecting to live for another 5 years. Every year he's going to spend 5 lakhs. So in total, he's going to spend 25 lakhs. So out of the 50 lakhs, in all probability, he'll be left with 25 lakhs. Can he afford to put the 25 lakhs in a risky instrument like equity? Of course, yes, because is that going to impact his expenses? The answer is no. Does he have the ability? The answer is yes. Does he have the willingness? No. So in such cases, you need to counsel that person and tell him that you have the ability. So why don't you explore? Because if that 25 lakh is going to be surplus, it's not that you're going to use it. Probably it is going to go in as a part of the legacy to the next generation, and your next generation might want to keep it for 10, 20 years. So that is what I usually recommend. Don't go by rule of thumb, because it does not fit in every case. You evaluate the ability, you look at the risk, give preference to ability, and then look at the willingness. Okay, so that is what I recommend. And I think the second question you asked was?
No, it was this question only. The second question was, so basically, some people still have that inhibition of investing in equity because that investment is volatile, at least in the short term. So how to get over that inhibition? Basically, you have the ability, but how do you channelize that willingness, as you mentioned?
Absolutely. I'll give you an anecdote to explain the scenario. Whenever you're investing into an FD, it's a straight line. Correct? You get the same constant return throughout the period.
Yeah.
Whenever you're investing into equities, it's like this. Okay. If you go and visit a patient in an ICU and you see the monitor, that if that monitor has a straight line, what does it mean? The person is dead. And if that monitor has a fluctuating line, what does it mean? The person is alive. So my simple answer to this question is that if you want to be alive in your financial life, you need to take risk. You cannot earn that straight line because you'll be dead any which ways, because that money is not going to grow. So if you have that 5 years plus horizon, my simple suggestion is to, give yourself that much of time, go through that volatility, because trust me, that volatility itself is the reason why you're making money. If that volatility was not there, why will you make money? If you're not taking that risk, why will you make money? You compare a salaried individual with a businessman. Why does the businessman make usually more money than a salaried individual over a period of time? Because he has taken risk. because he knows what is he doing. So till the time you know what you're doing, that risk is actually not a risk. It's basically helping you to make something big in life. That is the advice that I will give.
That's a great analogy, Vineet, and truly something that people who are hesitant, I think they'll lose their hesitancy after this insight that you gave. So my next question is, so I have seen that people invest at two extremes. So either people are very conservative, stick to gold and FD and government bonds, or people like to play in the equity markets, have some mutual funds, or even invest on their own. But between that, there is a big market of fixed income instruments, corporate debt instruments, stuff like this. So as an investor, is this a good opportunity to invest in? And how should we approach investing in these instruments? Because not a lot of information is out there when it comes to investing.
Sure. So these instruments are good instruments if someone is looking to have some stable income coming in and a little better income than what you're getting in a typical bank account, typical bank. But the only thing you need to be mindful when you're committing to such investments is the credit risk or the probability of that company going bust in the near future. Okay. So we have seen several examples of companies going bust, the recent being DHFL, right? So DHFL was a very strong company and people used to have fixed deposits, but in a matter of few days, it went bust. And now people who have invested money are literally begging for their money to be paid back. So what my suggestion is that if you're exploring corporate fixed deposit or the so-called non-convertible debentures, you look for companies which are very, very strong or they have a very strong parentage. A disclaimer, I'm just suggesting these names for examples. I'm not recommending this as an investment. But if you look at Bajaj Finance, if you look at Mahindra & Mahindra, if you look at HDFC, if you look at LIC, if you look at PNB, these are NBFCs which has a very strong parent. So if anything happens to these NBFCs, there will be an intervention of the parent company because they've got a lot at stake. Correct? But when you talk about Shriram, I'm not saying that Shriram is a very low quality company. It is strong, but their parent may not be as strong as something like a Bajaj or something like an HDFC. So for a matter of few percentage points, I generally don't recommend to take unnecessary risk. People invest money in cooperative banks just to get a 1 or 2%, but they're risking their capital. If you want to take that risk, why not take that risk in the equity market and make more return than what you're trying to make in a cooperative bank or maybe in a Patpedi, which is like it's very popular in states like Maharashtra, Calcutta, or West Bengal and all. So that is what my recommendation will be. So understanding risk, and that is where people falter. People don't understand the risks. They are just chasing return and they try to overlook the risk. And that is where majority of the people lose money.
Sure. Another question is that a lot of times adults also have to make financial planning decisions for their parents, especially if they themselves have not made financial decisions for themselves when they were young. So how do you approach investing for your family members, especially when you are investing on behalf of a senior citizen or someone who's about to become a senior citizen in your family?
Sure. So first of all, what you need to understand is what is going to be their cash flow requirement. Because if the person is working in a government organization, he or she may be having pension, but not necessary that the pension that he or she is getting is adequate to take care of the expenses. And one of the major expenses that happens is the medical expenses and traveling in and around or gifting. These are the core expenses that typically people have after retirement. Okay. And in some cases, you have also observed that parents, even at that age, have to financially support their children who may not be earning or who may not be earning that well. Correct? So after understanding all these needs, you need to then decide what instruments will help them to have a sustainable cash flow with limited amount of either no risk or limited amount of risk. Once you have taken care of that, anything excess, which in all probability would come as a legacy after the parents are no more there, that amount of money can be invested into some market linked instruments with ensuring that parents understand those things and they have an in principle approval. They may not understand the workings of it, but they know that their requirements are taken care and the remaining amount, which is excess, that can be invested into such instruments.
Sure. And one final question I got was that as salaried professionals, we get money on a monthly basis. So should we have a plan wherein we are channelizing our monthly savings into investments on a monthly basis, or should we wait to make a lump sum investment or try to time the market or something like that?
See, first of all, when it comes to timing the market, no one can do it consistently. Okay. So timing the market means timing the entry point, which is at a lower level, and exiting at the highest point. And no one can do that with accuracy or with consistency over a long period of time. And you take any investor, okay, the only key of making money in the markets is to stay invested for a really, really long period and be consistent on it. In the past 18 months, market has given opportunities time and again to invest money. Okay. But people have always been thinking about, no, market has come to this level, it will fall down. I will wait and I will put my money when it comes to this level. Again, the market has come to that level. Then again, person thinks that no, it will go further down. Okay. Then at some point of time, market doesn't give you that option or choice. It doesn't give you reaction time. At some point of time, it does a reversal. And then people will wait. Now it has reached to a certain level. I will wait for, to put money and have some corrections. And in this pursuit, majority of the people who are just waiting for timing the market, they lose out on crucial investment opportunities. So the only and the short way of investing is to put money at every point of time and have a time period assigned to your goal. Do a goal-based investing. When you do a goal-based investing, trust me, you don't require to time the market, because there have been several studies that have happened, and even if a person is able to time all the tops and the bottoms, he is going to make about 1 to 2% annualized return. That's it. If at all, he's able to time all the ups and downs consistently. So to get that 1 or 2% is really not something that you should be bothered about. You should just relax. You should just focus on saving. Let that saving be put to good use and relax in your life and focus on earning more. Okay. So I, as an investor myself, my focus is on increasing my saving. My focus is not on increasing the return, because that will anyways happen. Even if I take the effort of increasing the return, probably I'll going to add 1 or 2% more, not more than that. So I let the professionals do the money management who are there into this, or have certain investment chosen and then put my money, focus on that saving thing, and you will make a lot of money. But you need to give it time. So that is what I would recommend. Periodically save every month, even if in a particular month you do not have much to save it, whatever you could. And whenever you have any surplus income or some windfall, use that money to invest and probably prepone some of the goals that you have.
Sure. So Vineet, you have been in this industry for quite a long time, and you have been advising people for at least the past 7 or 8 years professionally. So what are some of the myths that you have encountered people still hold when it comes to financial planning?
So first is that people think that they don't need a financial plan, because like I told at the beginning of this talk as well, that people think that if they are investing adequately in PPF, EPF, they have got insurance policies, they've got some mutual fund, people think that it is taken care. So people don't feel the need of having a financial plan. That is the first myth. Everyone needs a financial plan, whether a person earning 10,000 rupees a month to someone who's earning 10 lakh rupees or 10 crore a month, because the more you earn, the more will be the expenses that you will have in terms of lifestyle. Your core expenses might remain the same. Your liabilities will increase. So it's important that more and more you earn, the detailed planning you need to do, because complexities increase. And we have seen that happening. The more you earn in life, the more complexities you will have. So you need to have a plan which will address those complexities. So first myth is that investing is financial planning. That's not true. Second, people think that investing is only for the rich. That is also not true. Even having limited amounts of money, in fact, it is important that you channelize that limited amount of money in the right ways. So financial planning is even for people who have got limited sources of income. Third is that financial planning is expensive. In fact, not having a financial plan and then making those investments and then committing mistakes and after a few years realizing that is an even more costlier mistake than paying an advisor and taking professional help. So financial planning in that sense is not expensive if you have the right way of looking at it. Okay. And then and there are many more myths, and one of the other myths that I feel is that financial plan is something that needs to be done at a later stage of life. When you have loads of money, or when you're married, or when you're approaching retirement, that is when you need a financial plan. That is again not true. Whatever income that you have, whatever age that you start working, you need to have a plan for fulfilling some of the desires, aspirations, goals. There is no right or wrong age. Even a 50-year-old, even if he or she has not started doing anything, they can do something if they have a financial plan. And even a 20-year-old who has just started working will need a financial plan. Okay, so these are some of the common myths that are there.
Sure. And now I think we are almost done with this session. I have two different kind of questions to ask you before we call it a wrap. So
Sure.
One is that you have successfully started and are currently managing two entrepreneurial ventures. One is Wealth Creators Financial Advisory, and one is your own Finance Education Academy. And in the past as well, you have worked as a team leader and training consultant for a lot of large banks. So I want to know, how has your experience been starting your own company? What are the key learnings you got from it, and some of the key leadership advice that you feel actually work in the real world and it's not something you learn from the textbook, but actually something you applied and it gave you results?
Sure. So 3 key learnings, if I have to summarize my entire journey, things that I've learned either by experience or by committing mistake. First is that whenever you're starting something new, let's say you're getting into the entrepreneurial strain, it's very, very important that you have a financial backup. Okay. Because if you don't have a financial backup, you cannot expect your business to start paying you money in 6 months. It might take longer. So you need to have a really, really good financial backup. Okay. Which fortunately, I had the privilege of having a financial backup. Okay. My spouse was also working, so I had some active income coming in. My liabilities was very, very limited. Okay. My expenses were also controlled. So these are some of the things financially you should be prepared even before you think of starting anything on your own. That is first. Second is that you need to start hiring people with the right talent. Okay. And don't look at it as an expense. This is the mistake that we did. So we hired our first person after 2 years. Okay. And we thought that it's an expense. We are not making money. Why do we need to add one more expense? We had an office. It was just both of us doing everything end to end. Okay. So that was the mistake that we did. And I firmly believe that if you have an able team, that will free up a lot of your time as an entrepreneur, which you can spend on improving the business or making the business more scalable. Because if you don't get that time, you will only be firefighting, and you'll never get adequate time to think what should be done better. How should you grow your business? What are the other things that you should be offering? Okay. Those kind of things will not be there. So that is the second thing. And the third learning that I have is that you may not be doing everything, but you need to know how things needs to be done. So in advisory, I know almost every aspect of this business, right from the operational thing to the systems that we use in and out, to the accounting part, everything, because I have done those myself in the initial this thing. So that hands-on experience is very, very important, so that if there is a challenge in your team and if someone is looking up to you, you should be able to, most of the times, I'm not saying 100% of the time, you should be able to help that person overcome that challenge. Okay. So this will come over a period of time, but this definitely helps you, so that at some point of time, if there is any challenge and you have that hands-on experience, you are one of the first ones to anticipate that challenge and try to get a solution. Okay. Or in some rare circumstances, if any of your team member is trying to take you for a ride, what is right and what is wrong. Correct. So these are the 3 key learnings that I think I have either learned by experiences or mistakes.
Sure. And for the last question, I had specifically kept this as the last question, primarily because this is kind of on the border of finance and philosophy. So how do we define the notion of enough when it comes to money? And do you think that is important in the first place?
100%. In fact, lot many times, when I have some, first of all, I have a very busy schedule because I'm managing two businesses. But whenever I get some free time, so usually I always think that what is that level wherein I should start taking things a little lightly, not work too much, because time is also running out, age is also running out, and you're missing on certain things. When you are in the pursuit of making money, there are so many things also you are missing out, right? So this question has now started bothering since the past year or two, wherein, and specifically, after pandemic happened and you started working from home, initial few months you had a lot of free time, you did not have that much of work. So this was the thought process which was constantly going in my mind. Okay. So the answer to this is that it's important that you define at what level, after which you would start taking things a little lightly. I'm not saying lightly in the sense not seriously, but you also need to have time for yourself, which I'm learning. I'm not there. Okay. And you need to start, you need to learn to say no to things. Okay. And I've also learned that you cannot do everything. You need to, select certain things, and then those things you need to do. So once you define what is that enough thing, automatically what will happen is you will start working only to generate that enough. Okay. And when can you define that enough? When you know how much money you need to have a decent lifestyle. If you're living, if you're able to have that kind of a stream of income, which is basically maybe a passive stream of income, or the business is set in such a way that even if you don't do anything additionally, you will have a set of income. So the moment you get there, then anything about that becomes aspirational spend, and aspirational spend has no ending. So that is what is very, very important, so that you can enjoy your life and not have all the money and no time to spend it, and maybe you retire at the age of 60, 70, and then you have money but you don't have the physical health or the time to spend it.
Sure. So I think that's a wrap from our end. Thanks a lot, Neet, for doing this. And for our listeners, I would recommend that please check out the website wealthcreators.co.in. They are a leading financial advisor. They have their own small case. They have videos, frequently asked questions, blogs that you can refer to make better financial decisions, and get in touch with them if you need any financial planning advice. So thanks a lot, Vineet, for taking out time. I hope you enjoyed the session.
Absolutely, Prabal. Thank you very much for asking those questions. It took me back to the memory lanes, and I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in, and stay tuned for the next episode.